It was almost midnight when he heard the knock. Not the polite, gentle tap of someone who wasn't sure they should be there. No, this was confident. 3 solid knocks that demanded attention. Ryan looked up from his laptop screen, his eyes tired from staring at design mock-ups for the past 4 hours. He lived alone in this small apartment above a laundromat, and nobody ever visited him this late. Actually, nobody visited him much at all these days. He'd moved to this town 6 months ago after everything fell apart back home. The breakup, the job he'd quit, the life that had stopped making sense. This place was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet place where he could focus on freelance work and figure out who he was without all the noise. The knock came again, louder this time. Ryan got up slowly, his back stiff from sitting too long. He wasn't expecting anyone. His few friends knew better than to show up unannounced. And his landlord usually just texted. When he opened the door, she was standing there with a bottle of wine in one hand and a look on her face that was somewhere between determination and desperation. Her dark hair was slightly messy, like she'd been running her hands through it. She wore a leather jacket despite the warm summer night, and her eyes had that restless quality of someone who couldn't sit still if they tried. "Your light was the only one still on," she said. Not bothering with hello or sorry to bother you. She just walked past him into his apartment like she'd been invited, like they were old friends catching up. Ryan stood at the door for a moment, confused. He recognized her vaguely as the woman from 2 floors down. They'd passed each other on the stairs maybe twice, exchanged polite nods, nothing more. "I'm sorry, do you need something?" He finally managed to ask, closing the door slowly. She was already in his living space, which wasn't much, just a studio apartment with everything cramped together. She looked at his drawings pinned to the wall, touched the spine of a book on his shelf, picked up a coffee mug he'd left on the table. "I needed to be somewhere that wasn't my place," she said simply. She turned to look at him, and there was something raw in her expression. "You looked like someone who wouldn't ask too many questions." And the strange thing was he didn't. Maybe it was because he understood that feeling. That need to be anywhere but where you were, that desperate search for a moment of peace. "I'm Natalie," she said, setting the wine bottle on his counter. "Ryan?" "I know. I saw your name on the mailbox." She moved around his space with this easy confidence like she'd been there 100 times before. It should have been annoying. It should have made him uncomfortable. Instead, he found himself curious. "You work late," she observed, nodding at his laptop with its bright screen showing half-finished designs. "Deadline tomorrow," he said. "Or today technically, since it was already past midnight. Aren't you going to ask me what I'm running from?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. Her smile was challenging, like she was testing him. "Do you want me to?" "No," she admitted. "That's why I'm here." They ended up sitting on his floor because his apartment only had 1 chair, and she said floors were more honest anyway. Whatever that meant. She opened the wine bottle with a corkscrew she'd apparently brought with her, poured it into 2 mismatched mugs because he didn't own wine glasses, and started talking. She didn't talk about whatever she was running from. Instead, she talked about everything else. About the jazz club downtown that most people didn't know existed. About the best time to watch sunsets in this boring town. About a trip she'd taken to New Orleans 3 years ago. About her theory that people who drink black coffee are either very confident or very lost. "Which one are you?" Ryan asked, looking at his own black coffee from earlier. "Both," she said without hesitation. Obviously, he should have been working. That deadline wasn't going to extend itself. But there was something magnetic about the way she spoke. The way her hands moved when she told a story. The way she laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. Around 2 in the morning, he asked her the question he'd been wondering, "Why my door?" She got quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her mug. "Because your light was on and you looked like someone who understood." "Understood what?" "What it's like to build walls and then realize you're trapped inside them." The accuracy of that statement hit him harder than he expected. She barely knew him, and yet she'd seen something he thought he'd hidden well. "I saw you sometimes," she continued, walking to that coffee shop every morning at exactly 8:30, coming back at exactly 9, working with your curtains open until exactly midnight, every single day the same routine. "That's called being disciplined," he said, but he heard the defensiveness in his voice. "That's called being scared," she replied gently. "Trust me, I know. I've been running for so long I forgot what it feels like to stay still. You've been staying so still you forgot what it feels like to move." They sat in silence for a while after that, Not an awkward silence, but the kind where words weren't necessary. Outside, the street was quiet except for the occasional car passing by. The laundromat machines hummed their familiar rhythm beneath them. "I'm leaving in 3 days," she said suddenly. "Sunday night. I have to. Where are you going?" "Away, somewhere else. Somewhere safer." She looked at him with those restless eyes. "I probably shouldn't have knocked on your door." This was selfish. Why was it selfish? Because now you'll remember this. Me sitting here drinking cheap wine from a coffee mug, talking about nothing important, and part of you will wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. She was right, and they both knew it. But Ryan didn't ask her not to say things like that. He didn't ask her to leave either. Instead, he told her about his own story. About the relationship that ended, because he couldn't figure out how to be the person he wanted to be while being the person she needed. About moving here to start over but somehow just freezing in place instead. "You're good at this," she said when he finished. "At what?" "At being honest. Most people aren't. They put on masks and play games and never say what they actually mean." She leaned back against his wall. "It's refreshing." Terrifying, but refreshing. The hours slipped past like minutes. She told him about the art she used to make before life got complicated. He showed her some of his design work, and she pointed out which pieces had soul and which ones he'd made just to pay bills. She was right about those too. At 4 a.m, she finally stood up to leave. Ryan's deadline was ruined, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He'd been more alive in the past few hours than he'd been in the past 6 months. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Same time tomorrow? You're coming back?" "I have 3 days," she said. Might as well make them count. After she left, Ryan sat back down at his laptop. He stared at the designs he was supposed to finish, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He'd built such a careful life here, safe, predictable, contained, and in one night this stranger had walked in and shown him just how small he'd made his world. He finally sent an email to his client asking for an extension. First time in his entire career. Then he sat by his window and watched the sun come up, wondering what he'd gotten himself into, and more importantly, wondering why the thought of seeing her again tomorrow made him feel something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope mixed with terror. The exact combination that meant something real was about to happen. Friday arrived with bright sunshine and the kind of nervous energy that made it impossible to focus. Ryan had gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep, but he wasn't tired. His mind kept replaying the conversation, the way Natalie had looked at his drawings, the things she'd said that cut right through all his carefully constructed defenses. He told himself he wouldn't change his routine. He'd still go to the coffee shop at 8:30 like always. But when he got there, she was already sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. "Black coffee," she said, sliding one toward him. "Very confident or very lost, remember?" He should have been surprised. Instead, he just sat down. "How did you know I'd come here?" "Because you come here every day. Plus, I asked around. The barista says you're their most predictable customer." She grinned. "No offense." "None taken, I guess." They sat there for a while, watching people rush past outside. The morning crowd getting their caffeine fix before work, everyone moving fast, everyone busy, everyone looking like they had somewhere important to be. "So what's the plan?" Ryan asked. "Plan? You said you had 3 days. What are we doing with them?" She raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Unless you just showed up here by coincidence." "Fair point." She leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with that restless energy. "Okay, you know this town, right? You've lived here for months." "Yeah. Do you actually know it, though? Or do you just know the path between your apartment, this coffee shop, and the grocery store?" Ryan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She had a point. He'd lived here for half a year and barely explored beyond his basic routine. "That's what I thought," she said, triumphantly. "So today, we're going to actually see this place. The parts tourists don't know about. The places that make a town real." They started at a bookstore Ryan had walked past 100 times but never entered. It was one of those old, cramped places with books stacked everywhere, the kind where you had to turn sideways to get down the aisles. Natalie pulled random books off shelves and read him her favorite passages. Not the famous quotes everyone knew, but the weird little sentences that probably meant nothing to anyone else. "Listen to this," she said, flipping through a worn poetry collection. The maps we follow aren't the ones that lead us home. Good, right? Did you just make that up? I wish. That would make me sound deep and mysterious. She put the book back. Come on. Next stop. Next was a diner he'd never noticed, tucked between two larger buildings. The kind of place with cracked vinyl seats and a menu that hadn't changed since the 70s. They ordered pancakes neither of them was really hungry for and talked about the things people usually keep hidden. She told him fragments of her story. Not the whole thing, not yet, but pieces. A business she'd started with someone she trusted. How that trust got broken. Money problems that spiraled. Legal issues that might or might not have been her fault. I'm not running from the law, she clarified quickly. Just to be clear, I'm running from someone who thinks he owns me because we used to be together. The way she said it made Ryan's stomach tighten. Is he dangerous? Aren't they all when they can't handle losing control? She pushed her pancakes around her plate. I stayed too long, kept thinking he'd change, that I could fix things. Classic mistake. That's not a mistake, that's hope. Hope that almost got me hurt. She looked up at him. You know what the worst part is? I still catch myself wondering if I overreacted, if maybe it wasn't that bad. That's what happens when someone spends long enough making you doubt your own judgment. Ryan didn't know what to say to that. What could you say? So he just reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, quickly, then pulled back. Thanks, she said softly. Then, louder. Okay, enough heavy stuff. We have places to be. The rest of Friday was a blur of discovery. She took him to a rooftop he didn't know you could access where you could see the entire town spread out below. They climbed the fire escape of an old building, probably trespassing, definitely not caring. See? She said, gesturing at the view. This is what you've been missing. This whole time, this was right here. They found a record store in someone's converted garage where the owner played vinyl and told stories about every album. They walked through a park Ryan had driven past countless times but never actually entered. They got lost in a neighborhood with houses painted in colors Ryan didn't know were allowed. Somewhere around sunset, they ended up at that jazz club she'd mentioned the night before. It was in a basement, the kind of place you'd never find unless someone showed you. The music was live, raw, imperfect in the best way. They sat in the back and just listened, not talking, just being. When they finally left, it was almost midnight again. Ryan's phone had died hours ago. He had messages he hadn't answered, work he hadn't done, responsibilities he'd completely ignored, and he felt more alive than he had in years. This is dangerous, he said as they walked back slowly. What is this? You. The way you make everything feel possible. Is that a bad thing? It is when you're leaving in 2 days. She stopped walking and turned to face him. They were under a streetlight and moths circled above them. Would you rather I hadn't knocked on your door? He thought about it honestly. No. Even if it hurts later. No. Good answer. They stood there for a moment, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with cigarette smoke from the jazz club, close enough that he could see the tiredness behind her confident exterior. One more day tomorrow, she said. Let's make it count. Saturday started before dawn. She knocked on his door at 5 in the morning with coffee and a crazy idea. There was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. She'd found out about it and she'd bought spray paint. We're going to create something, she announced. That's probably illegal. Probably. You in? He should have said no. The old Ryan would have, but that version of himself felt like someone from a different lifetime. Yeah, I'm in. The warehouse was massive and empty, with broken windows letting in streaks of early morning light. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Someone had been here before. There were tags and murals covering parts of the walls, layers of other people's rebellion and art. Natalie handed him a can of spray paint. Paint whatever you're feeling. I'm not an artist like that. Everyone's an artist like that, they just forget. She shook her can, the ball bearing rattling inside. Don't think. Just do. So he did. He painted messy, chaotic lines that didn't make sense, words that felt true, colors that expressed things he didn't have language for. Beside him, Natalie created something beautiful and sad, a figure reaching for something just out of grasp. They painted until their fingers were stained and the sun was fully up. They sat against the wall looking at what they'd made, breathing in paint fumes and possibility. "I'm going to miss this," she said quietly. "Miss what?" "Feeling like myself. The real version, not the scared one who's always looking over her shoulder." "You could stay," Ryan said, even though he knew it was pointless. "We could figure something out." She turned to look at him and there were tears in her eyes that she was clearly fighting. "I can't bring my mess into your life. You're finally building something here. I'm not going to be the person who destroys that." "What if I want you to?" "You don't. You just think you do because this has been intense and fast and feels important." She wiped her eyes roughly. "But trust me, I'm not what you need. I'm chaos, Ryan. I'm always running, always breaking things. You deserve someone who can stay, and you deserve someone who doesn't make you feel like you have to run." They sat in silence after that, the weight of Sunday hanging over them. One more day. Then she'd be gone, and he'd be left with spray paint on his hands and a heart that felt more awake and more broken than it had in years. But they still had today, so they left the warehouse and spent Saturday living like people who knew time was running out. Every moment felt sharper, more real, more important than it probably was. And when Saturday night came and she stood at his door ready to leave again, neither of them wanted to say goodbye yet. So she stayed, and they talked through another night, holding on to hours like they could somehow make them last forever, even though they both knew Sunday was coming whether they were ready or not. Sunday morning arrived too fast and felt too final. Ryan woke up on his couch, neck stiff, with sunlight cutting across his face. For a moment, he forgot. Then he remembered. Today was the day Natalie left. She was already awake, sitting by the window with her knees pulled up, looking out at the street below. She'd been wearing the same clothes since Friday, and her leather jacket was draped over his only chair. She looked smaller somehow, less sure of herself than the person who'd knocked on his door 3 nights ago. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from too little sleep. "Morning." She didn't turn around. "I should go pack." "When's your bus or train or whatever?" "Tonight, around 8. That meant they had hours left. It should have felt like enough time, but instead, it felt like seconds. They went to that coffee shop again, the one that had become their spot even though they'd only been there twice. The barista gave Ryan a knowing look when they walked in together, but didn't say anything. Small towns were like that. Everyone noticed everything but pretended they didn't. This time they didn't talk much. The conversation that had flowed so easily for 3 days suddenly felt stuck. What was there to say? They both knew how this ended. "I don't even have your number," Ryan finally said. "I know." "Can I have it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "That would just make this harder." "It's already hard." "Harder then." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "If you have my number, you'll text me. I'll text back. We'll try to make something work across whatever distance, and eventually it'll fade anyway because that's what happens. Or worse, it won't fade, and we'll just hurt each other from far away." "You don't know that." "I do, though." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I've done this before, Ryan. I've tried to hold on to things that weren't meant to last. It just makes the ending worse." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that this was different, that what they'd found in 3 days meant something, but part of him knew she was right. 3 days wasn't enough to build a life on. 3 days was just a moment, a beautiful interruption, a glimpse of something that could have been different. After coffee, they walked with no destination in mind, just moving through the town, passing all the places they'd discovered together. The bookstore, the diner, the park. Each one a small memory already turning golden and distant in his mind. "Tell me about where you're going," he said. "Portland, maybe, or Seattle. Somewhere bigger where I can disappear easier." "And then what?" "Find work." Find a place. Try to put things back together. She kicked a small rock down the sidewalk. There's a women's shelter I can go to first while I figure things out. They help with job placement and apartment deposits and all that. Sounds like you've done this before. Not like this exactly. But yeah, I've started over a few times. She glanced at him. That probably makes me sound unstable. It makes you sound like a survivor. She smiled at that, the first real smile he'd seen from her all day. Thanks. They ended up back at his apartment around noon. Neither of them mentioned the obvious fact that she should probably be at her place packing. Instead, she helped him, finally finished that design project he'd abandoned 3 days ago. She sat beside him, offering opinions, making suggestions, keeping him company while he worked. It felt normal, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of 3 days. This is good, she said, pointing at the screen. But the color there feels wrong. Make it warmer. She was right. He changed it and the whole design came together. How did you know that? I used to do design work too, before everything got complicated. She leaned back. I was pretty good at it, actually. You should get back into it, in Portland or wherever. Maybe. If I can stop running long enough to build something that lasts. There it was again. That theme that kept coming up. Running versus staying. Moving versus being still. The push and pull between safety and risk. Around 4 in the afternoon, she finally said she needed to go pack. But she didn't move from his couch. They both just sat there, letting time slip past. Not ready for this to be over. I wish I'd met you at a different time, she said suddenly. When I wasn't leaving. When I had my life together. I wish I'd met you before I built all these walls. Would it have mattered? If the timing was different? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe we needed to meet exactly like this. Maybe that's the whole point. What's the point? To wake each other up. To remind each other that there's more than just survival. That there's actually living too. She looked at him with those restless eyes that didn't seem quite as restless anymore. You're going to be okay, you know, after I leave. I know. You are too. I'm not as sure about that. I am. You're stronger than you think. At 6:30, she finally stood up. I really need to go pack now. He walked her to the door, knowing this was probably goodbye. She'd leave, from her own apartment, and he wouldn't see her again. That's how these things worked. At the doorway, she turned and looked at him. Really looked at him, like she was trying to memorize something. Thank you, she said, for these 3 days. For not asking too many questions. For not trying to fix me. Thank you for knocking on my door. I'm glad your light was on. She kissed his cheek quickly, then pulled back before either of them could make it into something more. Then she walked down the hallway toward the stairs, and he watched her go. He went back inside and stood in his apartment that suddenly felt emptier than it ever had before. All the careful order he'd built looked hollow now. He'd spent 6 months creating this safe, predictable life, and in 3 days, a stranger had shown him it wasn't really a life at all, just an existence, just waiting. Around 7:30, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I broke my own rule. This is Natalie. I'm at the bus station. He typed back fast. Wait there. I'm coming. He ran down the stairs, faster than he'd moved in months. Ran through streets that didn't feel boring anymore because now they held memories. The coffee shop where she'd been waiting. The bookstore where she'd read him poetry. The corner where they'd stood under streetlights and admitted this mattered. The bus station was small, just a covered area with benches and a ticket window. She was sitting alone, her backpack beside her, looking lost and found at the same time. You came, she said when she saw him standing up. Of course I came. He was breathing hard from running. Look, I know you're leaving. I know this doesn't make sense. I know it's only been 3 days, but I can't let you just disappear without saying this. Saying what? That you changed something in me. That these 3 days mattered. That wherever you go, whatever happens, I hope you find a place where you can finally stop running. Her eyes filled with tears. I hope you find a way to start moving again. A bus pulled up, its brakes hissing. The driver opened the door and called out the destination. Portland. Of course. She picked up her backpack, hesitated, then pulled something from the outer pocket. A small sketchbook, worn and bent at the corners. She handed it to him. I meant to leave this behind anyway, she said. Maybe it'll explain things better than I can. Natalie, don't follow me, okay? Please. Let me do this on my own. She backed toward the bus, but maybe. Maybe when I'm ready. When I've figured things out, maybe I'll come back. If you still want me to. I will. You say that now. I'll say it then too. She smiled through tears, then climbed onto the bus. He stood there and watched her find a seat by the window. She pressed her hand against the glass and he raised his in return. Then the bus pulled away, taking her into the night, toward whatever came next. Ryan walked home slowly, holding her sketchbook. When he got back to his apartment, he finally opened it. Page after page of drawings, most of them places. Cities, towns, roads leading somewhere. And on the last page, circled heavily in pen, an address in Portland. A coffee shop called Wanderer's Rest, with a note beside it. If I ever stop running, I'll be here. He sat on his floor where they'd sat that first night, and he let himself feel everything. The loss, the hope, the confusion, the gratitude, all of it at once. 3 days ago, a stranger had walked into his room like she owned the night. Now she was gone, and his life would never be the same. He just had to decide what to do about it. Monday morning felt wrong. Ryan woke up expecting to hear a knock on his door that didn't come. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, too much like it had been before Friday. Like the last 3 days had been a dream he'd woken up from too soon. He made coffee and sat by the window watching the street below. People went about their normal routines, completely unaware that his entire world had shifted. The landlord was sweeping the sidewalk. The laundromat was already full of early morning customers. Everything was exactly the same as it had been a week ago, except him. The sketchbook sat on his table. He'd stayed up half the night looking through it, studying her drawings, trying to understand the person who'd walked into his life, and then right back out of it. Each page told a story of someone searching for something they couldn't name. Roads without destinations. Windows without clear views. Doors that might be opening or closing, hard to tell which. And that last page. Wanderer's Rest. Portland. An address that might as well have been on another planet. His phone rang. His client calling about the finished design he'd finally sent late last night. They loved it. Wanted to hire him for more work. Asked if he could start right away. The old Ryan would have said yes immediately. That's what you did. You worked, you earned, you built security. Can I call you back? He found himself saying. I need to think about some things. After he hung up, he sat there wondering who he'd become. You don't turn down work when you're freelance. You don't put your life on hold for someone you knew for 3 days. You definitely don't consider driving to another city to find a person who specifically asked you not to follow them. But he couldn't stop thinking about that sketchbook, about the way she'd circled that address like it meant something, like maybe she'd left it for him on purpose. His best friend Carlos called around noon. They hadn't talked in almost 2 weeks because Ryan had been too caught up in his quiet, controlled life to maintain friendships properly. You alive? Carlos asked. I've been texting you. Sorry, it's been a weird few days. Weird how? So Ryan told him. Everything. The knock on the door. The 3 days that followed. The way Natalie had left. The sketchbook with the address. He expected Carlos to tell him he was being crazy, that he needed to let it go and move on. Instead, Carlos was quiet for a minute, then said, So what are you going to do? What do you mean? I mean, are you going to sit in that apartment and wonder what might have happened, or are you going to actually do something about it? She asked me not to follow her. No, she asked you not to follow her right then. She needed space to figure things out. That's different than saying never come find me. Carlos paused. Look, I've known you for 10 years. The last 6 months you've been existing, not living. If this girl woke something up in you, maybe that's worth exploring. It's been 3 days, Carlos. 3 days isn't enough to build anything real on. Maybe not, but it's enough to know if something's worth exploring. His friend's voice got serious. Just promise me you're not doing this to save her or fix her, because that never works. I'm not. I think I need to do this to save myself. After they hung up, Ryan made a decision that terrified and excited him in equal measure. He started packing a bag. Not everything. Just enough for a trip. A search. An adventure that might lead nowhere but at least would lead somewhere. It took him 2 weeks to actually go. 2 weeks of talking himself in and out of it. 2 weeks of finishing up work projects and canceling his lease and telling his landlord he was leaving. 2 weeks of his friends asking if he was sure, and him not being sure at all but knowing he had to try anyway. He drove to Portland on a Tuesday morning, his car packed with the few things he'd decided to keep. The rest he'd sold or donated. It felt reckless and stupid and absolutely necessary all at once. Portland was bigger than he'd expected, more overwhelming. He found a cheap motel near downtown and spent his first day just driving around, getting lost, trying to understand the city Natalie had chosen to disappear into. On the second day, he finally worked up the courage to find Wanderer's Rest. It was in a quiet neighborhood, a small coffee shop with plants in the windows and mismatched furniture inside. The kind of place Natalie would love. He sat in his car outside for 20 minutes before going in. What was he even doing here? She could be anywhere. She might not even be in Portland anymore. She might have moved on or changed her mind or figured things out and decided she never wanted to see him again. But he'd come this far. Inside, the coffee shop smelled like espresso and cinnamon. A young guy with a beard was working the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. Ryan ordered a coffee he didn't really want and tried to figure out how to ask his question without sounding like a stalker. "Hey," he finally said, "I'm looking for someone. A woman, late 20s, dark hair, probably came in here recently." She might have mentioned this place specifically. The barista gave him a careful look. The kind of look that said he'd heard too many stories of guys showing up looking for women who didn't want to be found. "Look, I'm not." Ryan stopped, started over. "She left me the address of this place in a sketchbook. I think she wanted me to find her, or at least to try. I just want to know if she's okay." "What's her name?" "Natalie." Something shifted in the barista's expression. Recognition, maybe. "She came in here, a few weeks ago. Asked about job openings. Nice girl, seemed like she was going through something." "Did she say where she was staying?" "No, but she left an emergency contact address. Hang on." He pulled out a clipboard from under the counter, flipped through some pages. "Here. It's for a women's shelter on the east side. I'm only telling you because she said she gave this place's address to someone important, and you seem like maybe that's you." Ryan wrote down the address with shaking hands. "Thank you. Really." "Hey," the barista said as Ryan turned to leave. "If you find her, tell her the job's still open if she wants it." The shelter was in a converted house painted blue with white trim. Ryan sat outside for a long time trying to decide what to do. He couldn't just walk in there. These places existed to keep women safe from the exact kind of situation he was creating by showing up uninvited. Finally, he walked up to the entrance and pressed the buzzer. A woman answered through the intercom. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone, Natalie. She might be staying here or might have been. I'm not here to cause problems, I just need to know she's okay." "I can't give out information about our residents, I'm sure you understand." "I do. Could you just give her a message? Tell her Ryan was here, from the town she left 3 weeks ago. Tell her I have her sketchbook and I came to make sure she's okay." He paused. "And tell her I'm staying at the Riverside Motel if she wants to find me. I'll pass along the message if she's here. No promises beyond that." "That's all I'm asking, thank you." He went back to his motel and waited. 1 day passed, then 2. He explored Portland, found a park where people played music on weekends, discovered bookstores and coffee shops and neighborhoods that felt alive in ways his old town never did. He started to understand why Natalie had chosen this place. On the 3rd day, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? You came. Her voice. It was actually her voice. I came. The shelter director said you have my sketchbook. I do. You left it for me, didn't you? A long pause. Maybe. I don't know what I was thinking. I was scared and confused, and I wanted someone to know where I'd gone, but I also didn't want you to feel obligated to. I don't feel obligated.